is you're putting yourself in the culture of the biblical text. Seriously?
No, he's standing on the rocks.
Oh, okay. I thought she was calling her group. You're putting yourself in the biblical culture so that when you read the Apostle Paul's instructions, such as that we just read a second ago, you suddenly can see exactly from what he's drawing and making these points. And when he says, listen, I purpose to know nothing nothing among you but Christ and Christ crucified. Now, here was a guy who was a Pharisee, who was a rabbi, who was well studied. He was well respected among the Jews before coming to faith in Christ. This was not just a simple guy. And yet he said, listen, I only have devoted my life to a very simple message. Really in a very despised man, who was Jesus of Nazareth. Think about this as the Apostle Paul coming to a place like Corinth, Athens, where he stood before the finest minds of his day in Mars Hill, and coming here to a place of opulence and wealth that has, as was pointed out by Athena, a sea here and a sea there, from which trade is coming from both directions in the Mediterranean, gold from Spain, ivories from Africa. This was a place that brought wealth, and you can see some of it. I mean, you're looking at ruins, sometimes it's hard to imagine, but this was a place of wealth, of opulence, of pagan worship, of the deification of humans, of the glorification of the human body, as you saw in the museum. All of this is everything that appeals to man and mankind, all of those things. He says, listen, all those things that we run after, all those things that we pursue, he says, listen, all I am and all I want to do is to preach Christ, the despised one. Just before the passage that Debbie read, listen to what he says. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? And Paul could have been all those things. He says, where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For indeed Jews ask for signs, miracles, which they were given, by the way, and they still rejected it. And Greeks search for wisdom, like the philosophers on Mars Hill. He says, for indeed Jews ask for signs and Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To Jews, a stumbling block, and to Gentiles, meaning everybody else, foolishness. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. And now you know why he said that. All I want to do is preach Christ, because this is the power of God. It's foolishness to men. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. And that's why most turn away, because they still have their eyes set on those things. Beauty, glory, power, wealth, everything that these Roman cities exhibited, and why people flocked to these cities, and why they went and offered the offerings, as Athena described before, to these gods that are no gods whatsoever. Caught up in all of that. And God has preserved his wisdom, his power, in the simple, foolish message of the one despised by the nations, which is Jesus of Nazareth. All of you have been called. If you're in Christ, you've been called to that foolish message. You've been called to that foolishness. You've been called to that weakness. Not many wise, not many powerful have been called. We're just simple people. But we have a very powerful message. And that is the message of the gospel, because only through Christ is there genuine salvation for all who believe. But you've been put in a context in which you can see the contrast now between the simple message of the Apostle Paul, which is the power of God, and the opulence of the world. God chooses, I think God chooses to show us his power through something so small and something so despised by the world, to show that it is all of him and nothing of us. So this is a great way to contrast that, to the contrast of what the world pursues versus what is important to God, the things of God. So continue to put your hope on Christ, because all of us are attracted by these things. All of us have a propensity towards wanting power or wealth or position or authority or something. But put your hope and grasp fully and firmly to Christ only, and you will have the blessing of God. Questions or thoughts?
Thank you for that.